Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you be here as well. And I know I'm standing between you and lunch, so I'll probably keep this brief to 15 minutes or so. But thank you for making the time. So by way of introduction, obviously, my name is Robert MacDonald. I'm the CLO and CCO at Bybit, and obviously in younger years there as well. But I wanted to talk today a little bit about regulation, particularly in the blockchain space and cryptocurrency. And so I bring to that about 18 years experience, about 13 years in the TradFi environment with large global banks, and about 5 or 6 years in fintech and crypto as well. And also over that time, both working in Korea and working internationally, I've met with a number of regulators to talk about regulatory change and how they can help foster a collaborative environment. So over the next few minutes or so, we'll cover a couple of areas to understand the need for regulation, understanding the current global regulatory landscape, and how can we have that balance between evolving and fostering innovation, but also trying to meet the needs of the regulator, and finally, the impact on innovation and adoption as well. So I think, obviously, I'm preaching to the converted that everybody in this room knows that blockchain technology has been a game changer. It's not only changed in terms of financial services, the way we share information, also how we do supply chain management, but also how we think about ownership, such as NFTs. And also with that change has come a regulatory challenge as well for regulators. Obviously, most regulators think within their own country, but blockchain, as we all know, is basically global in nature. So as we talk about transcending borders with blockchain, as we just talked about there, having too much regulation can actually stifle innovation and hinder widespread adoption. So also companies like my own and companies like yours are also seeking to get that balance right in terms of the complexity of technology, get that balance with compliance, but also trying to satisfy regulators as well. So what I'll do is I'll spend the next few minutes going through a couple of the major changes or major challenges that we're seeing around the world. So starting with the US. The US actually has taken a fragmented approach to regulation and blockchain and cryptocurrency trading. Some states, like Wyoming, are embracing it and very collaborative. Other states are taking a very severe and strict approach. Regulatory bodies like the SEC and CFTC are trying to find that balance, and I think all of us are probably aware of a few high-profile lawsuits as well. So I think the challenge for the US is how can they get a harmonized approach across the 50-odd states that they have as well. Second step forward a little bit is the European Union. They're probably one more step, in my view, advanced from the US in terms that they have the MiCA markets in crypto asset regulation coming in later this year, where for the first time across the whole of Europe and the member states, there'll be one harmonized view in terms of how to treat crypto assets. This is a fantastic approach and actually one which will be an interesting implementation at a local country level, but also poses its challenges in terms of how do you comply with local regulation as well and local compliance needs. China, I think most of us probably know, they've taken a stringent approach on cryptocurrency and blockchain with a lot of the initiatives around blockchain technology or certain projects being backed by the state or backed by the government. Going to the other side of the world before we come back to Korea, specifically to Latin America and El Salvador. El Salvador has taken a really bold approach to recognize Bitcoin as a legal tender within the country, so which is a fantastic willingness to embrace new technologies, but also comes at a risk that with regulation being unclear, how do they treat that in the country, or how do other emerging markets treat that? And then finally, to our host here in South Korea, for many years now, I think it's been recognized that South Korea has been at the forefront of adoption, change, and technology as well. So it's no surprise, a number of years ago here in Korea, the government passed some regulation specifically for virtual asset service providers and for consumer protection. That conversation has been ongoing in Korea, which is fantastic. And actually, there's a need now to get that balance right between helping with compliance, small, medium-sized enterprises. But the question is, how do we do that in the right way? So as a question poses at the top there, how can regulations evolve to foster an environment where innovation thrives but doesn't compromise safety or compliance? So as I pulled these 8 points together, they're just points off the top of my head. I'm sure other people have similar ideas. So the first one is collaboration with industry stakeholders as well. So coming from a TradFi space, this has been something that's been around for years. So when I used to work in London, there's a lot of trade forums, industry working groups, where you would sit down with the banks and you would sit down with the regulators to share ideas, talk about new guidelines, talk about new regulations. What did the regulator want to see? What could the banks realistically do? But I think in the blockchain space and in the cryptocurrency space, this is something that's lacking and something which we ought to think about. Linked into that is the guy doing the splits around flexibility and the flexibility in the framework. So we've seen in the TradFi space that the regulation has been around for a number of years. I've worked for major global banks that have been around for about 150, 160 years. That's taken that long to get the regulations right. Cryptocurrency, blockchain, probably 5, 6 years, 10 years maximum. And so I think the challenge for us in the industry, but also for regulators, is how do we regulate, but how do you do it in a flexible way that recognizes major exchanges like my own, all the way down to fintech, so to startups as well. One of those great innovations is the sandbox environment. I first came across this when I used to work for an e-commerce company in South Korea. And actually, this is a great way for the regulator and for the industry to work together, in that it's a way for the regulator to get comfortable with the products. And actually, you can literally play in the sand and actually try out new technologies, new products. And I've seen this not only in South Korea, also in Europe, and also, I believe, MAS in Singapore also likes a sandbox environment as well. Lastly, on this half of the slide, we need a clear guidelines as well. I mean, whatever comes out from a regulator or industry body needs to be really clear. I'm fortunate that I've got a team of about 80 people underneath me, mainly lawyers and compliance officers, whose full-time job it is to sit down and read regulation. Most people don't have that. And actually, so whatever comes out needs to be clear and can be interpreted all the way from major exchanges, all the way down to startups or people working individually on a project as well. Going over to the far side is around consumer education and awareness. And I think all of us in this room, including regulators and bodies, have a part to play in this, in terms of we've heard a lot of negative press, particularly around cryptocurrency. And I think there's a view still portrayed by some regulators that it has the wrong connotation. I think to get mass adoption and to get people to thrive in innovation, you need to bring people into that. So events like this, or for roadshows, or for working groups, is a great way to do that. And then probably the next one is a classic kind of compliance phrase around risk-based approach. And actually, this is a point where regulators can help us with understanding the right balance of what they want as well, and us as an industry can help with that. And then penultimately is a need for innovation around financial products. And this is, again, something that's been in the TradFi space for a number of years, where banks will sit down with the regulators, again, through industry forums, and talk about new products. The regulator will be quite honest and ask, we want to regulate them, how do we do that? And the bank will then basically say, we can't do this, but we can do this. And I think that's something that's lacking in the blockchain space and cryptocurrency space, in that interaction between exchanges, projects, and regulators as well. And I think that's a great way for regulators to understand more about the products and the environment they're trying to regulate. And then finally on this slide is probably the hardest one of all, in terms of international cooperation. So we talked a little bit a minute ago about the various countries or various regions in terms of what they're doing, but actually how do we get all those countries or regions to come together and work together? So I think events like this, or events like Token 2049 in a couple of weeks' time, are a great way to get to meet people, not only in the industry, but great way to meet regulators and lawmakers as well, or lawyers, and talk to them form industry working groups, and learn about best practice as well. So I think the rest of this, you guys will hopefully agree with me, but actually by implementing these strategies, regulators can actually help us as an industry to kind of nurture and grow and set the right environment for innovation and change as well. So as a key takeaway, we need to think about the diverse regulatory approaches, but actually not stifle the change. And actually, I think, again, South Korea has been leading the way in this in terms of collaboration between regulators and entrepreneurs as well. And understanding the need for regulation. And I think all of us will agree that actually, as we said at the very beginning, blockchain transcends borders, but actually if a regulator gets that wrong, it can actually stifle innovation and set the industry back for a number of years. And basically, in conclusion, I think we stand at an important point, an important crossroads, not just between me and your lunch, but actually between regulation and actually how we take that forward in terms of innovation and growth. So really what I wanted to leave you with was a couple of thoughts around sharing best practice, sharing your ideas, but actually as you go around events like this, get to meet people, think of ways that you can collaborate together, how can you work with regulators or industry bodies in your local country, and actually how can you form a group to work going forward. And I think it's an important time for us as an industry to recognize that. And that's one final thought that I wanted to leave with you. So again, thank you very much for listening, and thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your speech. I believe regulatory issues